After we got the Detroit Speed Quadrolink rear suspension installed in our '68 Camaro project called Reloaded, we noticed that the trunk floor wasn't as nice as the rest of the sheet metal on the car. This car wasn't really rusty, but the trunk floor had a pattern in it where water had sat from a leaky rear window and just kind of gave it some texture that, kind of looked like the surface of the moon. It wasn't full of holes, and, for a lot of street cars it might be okay, but we wanted to make sure that all these panels were nice and smooth and nice and solid steel. So we elected to replace the trunk floor with a new piece from Classic Industries. We determined that the area between the frame rails was the worst part of it, and the areas outside the frame rails were still in good enough shape to keep. So we started this process by removing the spot welds that held in the latch support assembly. And it's just a matter of playing hide and seek. You got to look inside the rain gutter areas and the weather strip areas and reveal all the spot welds, drill them out, and then use a hammer and chisel and kind of tap them so that they break free, so you can remove that whole support as one assembly. Now, underneath the sheet metal part of a trunk floor, there are a couple of supports that are there primarily to add some strength to the gas tank mount. When you fill a gas tank full of gas, it's very heavy, and the trunk floor itself would buckle if it was unsupported. And in our case, those original supports were still in good shape. They have a tendency to rot out, but ours were pretty nice. So we wanted to leave those and just remove the trunk skin from those supports, and then put a new floor in on top of the original supports. And another reason why we elected to keep those supports is it's just an easier way to make sure that the trunk floor fits right, because that lower support is going to hold that trunk floor in the proper orientation as we fit the new one into the car. Our new panel came from Classic Industries, and I always recommend getting the new panel in stock before you start cutting the old stuff apart, so that you know how far the edges go and how much you need to remove of your original piece. You don't want to cut too much out and find out, when the new panel comes in the mail, that it's not big enough. So once we sized up the hole we needed, Nick attacked the back of the car with a plasma torch and made some big cuts just to cut the large areas of trunk floor sheet metal out. And this is, done just to clear the way for the fine tuning of fitting the new panel. He left those two lower supports in place, and the last step was to drill and peel back the steel that was spot welded to those two lower floor supports. The process of fitting the new panel to the hole just takes some time and takes some patience. You have to keep inserting the new panel into place, checking it, measuring it. We find it's easy to put some 3M green tape to make lines on the panel while it's in place, take it out, and then use those lines as a guide for a cutoff wheel or an air nibbler or a type of saw, so that you can make precision cuts and kind of creep up on it. Again, you don't want to cut too much off this thing. And once you've found that you've trimmed enough off in all the different dimensions that it fits in the hole, you can start to plan the approach to weld it in. Now, this panel is going to be welded in place using a couple of different techniques. It's going to be spot welded around the perimeter with a MIG welder, and it's a butt weld operation where the two pieces of steel will be flush against each other with a weld bead over the top, which will then be ground. And where those trunk supports are, the new panel will have holes drilled in it, and those will get a plug weld operation where the welder will fill the hole and weld the top piece to the bottom structure all at once. To properly weld this, the panel really needs to be anchored solidly in the trunk. So Nick secured the perimeter with some sheet metal screws, and then also screwed the center of the panel to those lower supports and began his welding operation. And this is kind of thin steel, so you don't want to start at one end and do a heavy bead all the way across, because you'll either burn through the panel or you'll burn through the car, or everything will get warped. So again, it's a game of doing quick spot little zaps, a few at a time, and then move to a different area and do a few more. And then for the lower support area, you basically just put the MIG torch gun right in the middle of the hole, pull the trigger and draw a circle, and it'll puddle up with weld and fill itself solid. After all the welding is done, there's a grind operation where the big welds are ground down using a heavier grit 3M roll-lock disc. It's an abrasive wheel, moving progressively to a finer grit until you can no longer tell that the weld's ever happened. And once the trunk floor is in place, for this car, the next time we'll be touching the trunk floor will be to do some body work to make sure that there's no more grinding marks before it gets its final paint and spatter coat.